Is Al Black with Chewing the Gristle and my co-host, the poet, Tim Conroy. Welcome, Tim.
My brother Al, how you doing today?
Wonderful. The weather here in South Carolina is gorgeous. Our poet today, I want to welcome him, Indran Amirthanayagam. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Tim. Wonderful to be here.
Amir the Nanyagam is a translator, diplomat, columnist, essayist, and poet. He writes poetry in English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. He is the author of 19 books of poems, including The Migrant States, The Splintered Face, Tsunami Poems, Coconuts on Mars, Uncivil War, and the Patterson Prize winning The Elephants of Reckoning. Amir the Nanyagam is a 2020 Foundation for Contemporary Arts Fellow in Poetry and a past fellow of the New York Foundation for the Arts, the U.S.-Mexico Fund for Culture, and the MacDowell Colony. He edits the Beltway Poetry Quarterly, curates the reading series Poetry at Port-au-Prince restaurant in Silver Spring, Maryland, and serves on the board of DC Alt. Can you explain a little bit about your poetry journey, your influences, and how you came to be a poet?
Yes, I was born in an island, that no longer exists, a country that no longer exists. It used to be called Ceylon, and now it's known as Sri Lanka. So, that's one aspect of my personality that I feel that I came from a place that no longer is there, a way of life that has disappeared. Also, a kind of parity between the ethnic groups on the island, a kind of a friendly give and take, which has disappeared, and so that's part of my roots. Those are in my memories, of a kind of Edenic place, that was then bloodied up later by war and civil conflict and ecological ecocide and so on. So the story of that place being expelled from Eden, leaving Eden, became a kind of leitmotif of my poetic imagination in my life. I left the island of Ceylon, the country of Ceylon, when I was 8 years old. But those early memories are seared into me. And I only have a few of them, but they keep coming back and they keep informing some of my poems, a lot of my poetry. And they tend to be violent images, and they tend to be, but they tend to be also blindingly beautiful images, So I have both the lightness and the dark, in my imagination feeding me. So how I became a poet, I was lucky. My father was a poet, and he was a very fine poet, and he introduced me when I started writing poetry to other poets, and he could not deny, or my mother could not deny, this choice, because he himself was practicing this profession, of poetry. And in my mother's side, I have a great uncle. His name is Tambi Muttu. And Tambi Muttu left the island of Ceylon, a young man, and went to London, where he later founded Poetry London, which became a vital magazine publishing poets during the war, the Second World War. Every month he put out an issue, and there were the first poems of Dylan Thomas and the paintings of Henry Moore on the covers. And so Tambi Muttu was a poet. He was also will always be known as a very fine editor. So I had that model on my mother's side, this great uncle, and then my father. And then when we got to London, I was 8.5, and Tambimutu used to come over for a meal once a week to our apartment, our flat, as they say in England. And then, I was a boy, but I was seeing this white-haired, wild-haired older man, with my father talking about poetry, and I think that stayed with me. And then I went to Hawaii. My first American experience was really um, uh, physically, geographically. It was in the island of Oahu. We came as landed immigrants. We arrived through LAX, Los Angeles Airport, and then flew on to Honolulu. My father took a job at the East West Center in Honolulu, where he started something called the Culture Learning Institute, where he looked at his literature, which was his first love, and he looked at what happens when cultures meet in books, in stories, and novels, and poems. And he had the privileged position of being able, through that position job, to invite leading poets and writers from around the world to come to Honolulu and engage in this dialogue and discussions about themes like the contact literature and you know, uh, what is the literature that is born out of this meeting of cultures. And so, in that context in Honolulu, I had I had started writing poetry. I was about 14, 15. I started showing my first poems to my dad. My first poem was an imitation of a poem of my father's. And then one summer, I just had this burst of frenzy and creativity, and I started writing a poem every morning. Uh, and I would take up the poem to my dad and show it to him and get his opinion on the poem. And I did that for a whole summer. And I think that was a breakthrough moment. That was the first blitz moment in my poetry, and I was about 15 or so. And then he started showing my poems, and I did too, to a friend of his, Rule Denny, who was a poet who had earlier won the Yale Award many years earlier and was retired in Hawaii. And he had written part of the book, The Lonely Crowd, with, the book of sociology from Chicago. So Rule Denny looked at my poems and he said that he recognized a kind of 4-beat line in the poems, the kind of rock music lyric uh, and blues lyric. And that encouraged me, because I loved music and popular music. I used to listen to everything the Kinks ever recorded, and I used to listen to everything that came out of England, because I was still very English and very inspired by the music from Beatles and so many other groups. Writing these 4-beat lines, and Rule Denny's encouraging me. And then my dad and I go to the airport to pick up a visitor from the mainland. And this visitor had come, my dad had invited, he was an old friend of my dad. He'd invited him for a conference in Hawaii. And so we go to the airport, and my dad tells me this poet is a very important poet. He's a famous poet in the United States. And then we go with a lei, a garland of flowers, and we put a lei over on the shoulders of Allen Ginsberg, at the airport. Can you imagine? So here I am with my dad, who is a poet, and then this public dad, who becomes a kind of public father figure for me, Ginsberg. And then we go in the car back to our home, and Alan has his harmonium with him, and he starts to play, and he sings the song, which is published as Slack Key Guitar. Sweet Oahu is the one line in the poem, in the song, about the skyscrapers on the Waikiki beach. And then we get to the house, and this is the kicker. The phone rings. This is 1977 or something. And I go over to pick up the phone, and it's Bob Dylan calling for Allen Ginsberg. Allen Ginsberg had given the house number to Bob Dylan to contact him while was in Hawaii. There was no internet then, and so on. And in any case, we spent a lot of time together. So here I am carrying the phone between Bob Dylan, who was this huge, huge figure, and Allen Ginsberg. And they were working on the Rolling Thunder Revue at the time. They had already played, I think, a whole series of those concerts. I think they had more plans to continue, and so they were just discussing those details. And so these were inspirational moments for me. And then I wrote a poem about the conference where Alan participated, and I showed it to Alan, and he corrected it. He cut out about half of the first draft, and he said he does this with all his poems. I don't know if I believed him then. It's hard to imagine cutting out half. This is something good for any new writer. Half of your first draft, literally 50% of the words. But he did it on my poem, and he gave it back to me. Unfortunately, that poem is lost, but the version he edited. Anyway, and so I learned from that. That one statement by Allen Ginsberg about the first draft stays with me and influences me as I write poetry to this day. And I don't ever cut out 50% of my first draft. I don't think, but I do edit, and I do believe in editing and revising poems. And so then I kept writing, and then I got to college. I went to Haverford College on the East Coast. I wanted to play cricket there. They have a cricket team. I was a cricket player, and that's why I chose it. But I also, at Haverford, which was a male school then, and Bryn Mawr was a women's college, and they were brother and sister schools. I started a band called The End, a punk band, very influenced by the Jam, the Clash, the Members, the British music post the British invasion, but the most recent invasion, which was punk, Sex Pistols. And then I started with a group of friends. I wrote the words, they wrote the music. We did original songs together, and one of them wrote words and music, and it was a bit of a cult at the campus. We played at Haverford and Bryn Mawr. And I think I learned to work a poem on the stage during that band because we were performers, and theater was a big part of the show. It was so my poetry grew organically, and it was helped along by my father, helped along by the chance meeting or the meeting with Allen Ginsberg and with other poets. And it was always considered important in the family, even though it didn't make any money, and we knew it didn't make any money, or it didn't seem to make any money, and Allen Ginsberg didn't make money at that time. He later made money at the very end when he sold his papers, but what I mean is it's not about the money, but yet we have Wallace Stevens saying poetry is a kind of money. So this is the mystery.
Now that's a wonderful anecdote, and it just brings me to mention that today we lost our great poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Do you want to respond to his poetry and your thoughts?
No, it's a great loss because we have to accept that the passing on of the great and the not so great, everyone has to go onwards into Valhalla or wherever you do go after this mortal coil. But what a poet, what a editor, what a groundbreaker, who changed and gave, a savior, a great hero of small presses, and his work publishing Allen Ginsberg's Howl is the most famous thing he did, but so many, and his own book, Coney Island of the Mind. I had the luck of going over for the 100th birthday a couple of years ago, and what an experience that was. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in Vesuvius and in City Lights and in North Beach in San Francisco, and then seeing the paintings. I went to an exhibition of his paintings, including very witty and lovely work. I know that in the last couple of years, I mean, he stayed in his apartment on North, he didn't come out for that celebration because he was conscious of the limitations. He couldn't see very well. I think he was losing his eyesight, but people had brought him the news. They came up to him and they gave him the news of what was going on down in the bookstore and on the streets and in the bars. And now I wrote this poem today after hearing the news, and I'm close to Jack Hirschman, who's a very close friend of Larry. So I spoke with him a little bit today, and anyway, here's a little poem called "Starting Again, Larry." Larry Ferlinghetti has a book, Starting from San Francisco. Anyway, "Starting Again, Larry." I'm starting from San Francisco, and I'm going to cross the plains, the wheat and cornfields, then hop over to New York. At the same time, I will head south to LA, to San Diego, Tijuana, and then weave through the Mexican states. I will do this free now of body, not dependent on buses, trains, or airplanes, not even my feet. Mind breathing, Alan said. But over there in those mountains, Gary is still cutting wood and planting roses. And off North Beach, a curlew's cry from city lights, Jack Hirschman crafts an arcane. We are industrious, Larry, and in your name. Do not worry about us. Keep on flying everywhere you wish, unencumbered, and join the cancer survivor next year with her bionic leg in that X-rocket hurtling round the planet. But keep a discreet eye back here. Infuse us to write a poem to mark her heroism and wonder, and that of all of us living in the Coney Islands of waking dreams, that yes, we can climb, rise, soar, and come down again laughing wild in America. We can recover after remembering our 500,000 dead from the virus, each one a rhyme in the poem we must now write without you, and still with your spirit guiding our fingers wherever we say to the blank page, this one's for you, Larry, to keep you company on the journey through now endless worlds. Written to this day, February 23rd.
Marvelous, marvelous.
Thank you.
We want to hear a couple more poems, but in the context before you read, sort of introduce the where the poem comes from, what collection, and then after you read the poems, tell us a little bit about how you think about your poetry style.
Delighted. I'll read a couple of poems and then talk about address that question. From the Migrant States. This is my most recent book, published by Hanging Loose Press, and it's a big book in a way. I mean, there are lots of sections, and it sort of takes a look at America writ large, not just the United States, but the whole continent. And that's a definition of America, right? As whether you're living in Chile or in Canada, you're in America in a sense, and or in Haiti. And so all of this is in this book. One of the poems that I wrote in the book is called "The Migrant's Reply," and it was written in the height of this terrible sort of period when we were building walls, to wall off America from the rest of America, in a sense, and the people who were trying to cross over were getting caught, and separated and divided, and their families divided, and anyway, that's what led to this particular poem, "The Migrant's Reply," from the Migrant States. We've been running for so long. We're tired. We want to rest. We don't want to wake up tomorrow and pack our bags. We have gone 10,000 miles. We have boarded a rowboat, tugboat, bus, freight train. We have a cell phone and some bread. Our eyes are dry. Our breath needs washing. What next? You're putting up a wall on your southern flank. What an irony. The country that accepts refugees does not want us. We qualify. We have scars, and our host governments hunted at least some of us. The rest fled in fear. Gangs do not spare even the children. White vans took away our uncles, our cousins. Do you think they've been made into plowshares? Aye, what are you saying? Too easy to wear our hearts in these words, in slings, on our faces, furrowed, perplexed. What happened to kindness to strangers? Why do we have to be herded like prisoners held in a holding camp? We are human beings, and like you in safer countries, we have the same obligation to save ourselves and our children. Oh, the children, look at them. Give them food and school and a new set of clothes. Give them a chance. Whether you are red or blue, the eye of the hurricane does not discriminate. We are your tumbling weeds, hurling cars, flooding banks, and we are diggers of the dikes. We can teach you so many languages and visions. You would learn so much. You would never ever say, lock us up. I'll read, thank you. I'll read one other poem from Migrant States and then talk a little bit about this mysterious art, my craft of sullen art, remembering Dylan Thomas's line, exercised in the still night, when only the moon rages, and lovers lie abed, all their griefs in their arms. I labor not by singing light, not for ambition or bread. That's what a poem that's how it begins, that beautiful poem. And that in a way is an answer to your question about why I write and what the art is. But here's a little poem. It was a song, really. I recorded an album once with some musicians, very fine musicians in Haiti when I was living there. I lived there from 2014 to 2017. And in the last months of my stay, I recorded these poems. I had written them in Creole, and they put the tune, the poems to music. And we recorded an album called Rencontre Doute, which is available on, Spotify and so on, Apple Music, etc. Uh, but here is an English version of one of those songs, and it's called "The Avocado Season is Over." The season of avocados is over. The most beautiful girl in town is about to marry a man across the water. My brother is busy with his manuscript. Time to share ideas in a book has gone to the country without a hat. Accept reality. Don't live any more in fantasy. You are getting along in years, but have only spoken Creole for 2. You have a great long life ahead. Think, reflect, tell all the new families congratulations, good luck, then write again about your life in Haiti when the avocado was in bloom. 2 poems from the Migrant States. I write poems, I think, from the heart, from memory, from experiences that I have felt in my own bones and in my own day to day. I write poems also from the experiences of others. I'm a kind of reporter or journalist. I tell stories, and I get the stories from everyone, and some people give them to me almost willingly, and I transform their stories into poems. What is a poem? It's a kind of musical speech for me. I say musical speech. I mean, it dances. It's a dancing speech as well. So it's both music and dance, but the music and the dance, the material is words, some language, whether it's in English or French or Creole or whatever language I write in. I think of it as a kind of verbal music. that I'm producing. Now, if the music is there, the meaning is almost less important, or could be even irrelevant. If the music is there, the word music is there in such a way that it opens up your mind, listening to it, opens up your heart, or you can feel some sympathy with the sounds, and in such a way that you are uh, stoked to reflection, stoked to catharsis, to a kind of crying out, then the poem works for me. Now, when I mentioned the word catharsis, I'm a poet from Ceylon, as I mentioned earlier, a country that no longer exists. I'm a Tamil from a minority group within that line who fought for a separate state, an independent state, and lost. I mean, the civil war that took place over a 26-year period, even longer in some, depending on how you define it, but 1983 to 2009. So that long period has marked my poetry and has been central to much of my work. There's a book I wrote called Uncivil War, where I talk about the history of that war in poetry. And so the poem for me is a kind of historical history. I mean, the epic is supposed to be a poem, a historical poem, right, that contains history. But my poetry is, talking stylistically, it's a kind of free verse with a concern, though, for rhyme and meter and musical devices. The muse speaks to me in that way. So let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. That's how Eliot begins that famous poem, Proof Rock. And with those simple rhymes, I also write. I write. So I've been influenced by that poetry. I'm influenced, like any poet, I think, by what you read and what you digest intellectually and emotionally comes out of you in your own work. You reproduce, but it's made new. It's renewed through your own unique voice. And that voice for me is a lyric voice. It's a voice of lamentation. It's a nostalgic voice, but it's not a voice that writes. I'm not happy about being chained to a particular form. I mean, if I was given a task, write a sonnet, a Petrarchan sonnet or a Shakespearean sonnet, it would cost me a lot of labor and sweat and some frustration to actually comply with the rhyme schemes and the requirements. Even the haiku bores me in a sense. Why put something in 5, 7, and 5? Why not just put it in 17 and be done with it? I mean, the point. I don't know. I don't mean to attack the poor writer of haikus. I think it's a great. There are beautiful haikus, but I sometimes wonder about some forms, because I think some poets invent forms, and that's fine, but they also receive forms and as a kind of a test of how skilled they are as a poet. And I direct this comment really to the beginning poet. Don't be fooled by how well you can reproduce the Petrarchan sonnet, or how well you can reproduce the Villanelle. If you can do it, fine. But if it lacks intensity, if it lacks passionate intensity, as Yeats might have said, or if it lacks music of, Walcott used to ask, "Donde está la música?" Where is the music? And you're right. Don't write prose and call it poetry. Write prose and call it prose. Write poems and call them poems. Understand that there is a difference, but you only can tell the difference, you through your own practice. It's like meditation. There are I imagine different levels of meditation, different levels towards nirvana, and it takes many years. Leonard Cohen is a good example. He was sitting on Mount Baldy for 5 years or something, but then he came down. And I mean, the thing is, you challenge yourself. You're trying to purify, in a sense, your verse, through the practice of writing the verse, to the point where you can write, as Yeats wrote at the end of his life, how can I, in the poem called Politics, how can I, that girl standing there, my attention fix on Spanish, on Roman, on Russian politics. I mean, just that after so much time in his life spent on politics, on the fighting, on Irish identity and nationality, and then he recognizes that this is all silly, in a sense, before beauty. The writing of beauty, the 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 ode to beauty is what is wisdom, And so, yes, we can celebrate, poets can celebrate life, but we are living in a moment, as I mentioned in the poem written about Lawrence Ferlinghetti, that we're living at a moment where of great tragedy, and the 500,000 dead in the United States alone, um, of this worldwide catastrophe. And so I think a poet writes about that as well. Poet needs to tell the story of our lives on the planet to each other. Not just our lives, but also the lives of the other living beings on the planet. I don't mean to pretend that I know how an elephant thinks, or an insect, or a fly, but I want to try and say through my poetry to live and let live, to exist in an ecosystem where we recognize the value of each element. And if we eliminate one element, the whole house comes tumbling down. And so that's why it's so important to have the forest cover so that the coffee plant can grow underneath. But without that forest cover, it's exposed to the elements, to drying sun or beating rain, and then it can die. So we have to respect the complex, beautiful planet that we have inherited, try to fix what we have done wrong with it, because we can see the consequences, right? And we're living the consequences to this day. Just these polar winds and these, the unnecessary, unfortunate deaths and suffering that have resulted from these most recent climate catastrophes. And the poet has a role, I think, to play in raising awareness, at least in teaching, in being a part of the teaching. I'll stop there. But I mean, I just want to mention, I think that's very important. Uh, so I've gone off a little bit from the techniques of poetry but I am a free verse poet. I am a poet that tries to write in clear language. I think of poems as a kind of story and journalism. In a journalistic article, you don't want to become too obscure. You're trying to communicate some information with direct words and language. So that's where I fall in the poetry debates. Yeah.
Well, could you share a couple more of your poems then with us?
I would love to. Perhaps I'll read. Um, I'll recite one from memory, which I quite like, was from an earlier book called Ceylon, R.I.P. Rest in peace, Ceylon. It's called "You Must Love." You must love the land when you leave to build your house on the sea. Love what's lost, the mango tree burning in the garden, the curious noose of the familiar coat of arms. Love the ball turning strong, spinning in a dark, faraway land. Love the tongue you'll never again speak, that wrapped you and bled you and dried up some every day on the other side of the sea. And then from a book called Coconuts on Mars, which, thank you, which was published in India. But it's easy to get. It's actually, the publisher sends it, doesn't charge any postage, so it's actually less expensive than any book that I have in the States. And the book is called Coconuts on Mars, and I'll read two poems from here. One, I think is quite funny poem. It's called By All Means a Whale. The humpbacked whale has swum from beyond Cape Cod to frolic with her pup in the warm, cool waters off Samana. The migratory reach of birds, fish, and mammals is the subject of a million doctoral theses, but no one has yet to explain pure chance, coincidence, why I happened to see this particular mother and child on Saturday morning. The fact that I bought an excursion on a whale watching tour, that I was guaranteed a whale or another tour free of charge, are mere helpers of fate. The boat could have sprung a leak, the car taking me to port run out of gas. My imagination might have surprised me moving from observed reality to dream and fantasy. I did put Moby Dick in my bag, just in case. That's it. By all means. Living will. One day I will sit down with my soul and write that I have loved every bird that flew, every monkey on the branch, every elephant charging through the grass. I will say I love you as much as the baby gecko scampering past my foot, the snake rustling under the wood cut and stacked in my yard. I will say I have loved every creature, every song, every turn in the road, and I will be lying with my eyes open and my eyes closed. I am not God. I am not even the dog loyal to his master who misses him blind like his daughter in Lima, which I call at night until the next time we meet. In dreams, we chat cheek to cheek, remembering always that in paradise there are no trains, or roads, or seas, or death, no going away, no arriving, doors and garden open, souls who come and go, smiling, and all the angels, all birds, all dolphins, all men and women in song dancing. And why not reciting the Song of Solomon, the epic poems, the love songs that consoled when we set off on the roads, hopped on trains and aeroplanes, got caught in traffic in our head, said goodbye before saying hello. Did I know you down there? You were the greengrocer I walked past going to school in London. Oh, my dear, how beautiful you are, Pauline, with ripe red hair, who shared the religion prize with me at St. Vincent's on Blandford Street. But you may be alive still, and I'm not ready to meet my Maker, to be plucked from the cycle of rebirth. Not yet. I have poems to compose, children to raise, earth to cultivate. Come back later, angel. I have my will to revise.
To help guide the emerging poet, are there resources or craft books or poets that you would suggest for them to read to help them along their journey?
Yes, I think the best way to kickstart that journey is to read and read copiously and voraciously. Read W.B. Walter William Butler Yeats. Read his poems, The Tower and other poems, and well, read all of his poetry really. Uh, Read Cavafy, the Greek poet, who translated by Ray Dalven, Raedalve, and I think that particular translation is my favorite. Read Nazim Hikmet, the Turkish poet, again translated by Randy Blazing in Mutlu Konuk, published by Berseer Books. Read I mean, there's a wealth of great poetry. Denise Levertov, you know, Sylvia Plath. But don't read to the point where you just read. At some point, you read as a kind of kick to your own writing, and then write. Maybe write imitations of some of the poems you read. Try to as a start, and then go from there. Um, but think of a couple of things as you write. Think of what Derek Walcott used to say to young writers: "Donde está la música?" Where is the music? Where is the music in these verses? Think of think of poems as a kind of song. Think of Bob Dylan. Think of Leonard Cohen. Listen to Bob Dylan. Listen to Leonard Cohen. Listen to Paul Simon. Listen to the great songsters, whoever they are, wherever they come from. Listen to them and then write, because you're participating a in a field of creation that is not divorced from song, that is not divorced. It's part of a unity. it's a, it's one feast. And and so I thought, why not? When Bob Dylan was given the Nobel Prize for Literature, I celebrated. I do not have a problem with that, because I think and if Leonard Cohen were alive and he were to receive it, all power, because these are poets and musicians at the same time. We are musicians with words. That's what poets are. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of poetry written and published today that is not musically driven. That is prosaic. That is experimental in different ways. That the tent is big, and I'm not one to throw poets out of the tent under the. I'm not. I don't want to build walls either. I mean, my own politics in that poem suggests that. But at the same time, I do want to recognize the differences, and 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 it's a different intellectual experience. Taking on, for example, Gertrude Stein's and trying to uh, uh, appreciate what she's doing in a poem, as opposed to reading, Yeats at the end of his life, politics, as I quoted earlier. How can I, that girl standing there? Or, it's a different experience, and I don't say one or the other is necessarily the only experience. I'm trying to be a relativist. I'm trying to be a diplomat, but I do have my favorites. And my favorites are the songsters, the song makers, the lyricists, the lyric poets. I'm not a language poet. But don't, but language poets and I can be friends, and we can break bread together and have a tea and talk about the art, because we are both practicing different elements within that art, But I'm not one for breaking up a word into letters and flinging them across the white space in a page and then saying to somebody, well, here's the poem. No, I'm a fairly conventional, I dare to use that word, poet, in the sense that I believe in the left margin going across the page. And yes, I might break up a poem with spatially, but it's not my usual um, tendency in any case. And again, very important to say, this is not, there are many roads to the perfect poem, which of course doesn't exist, right? There are many ways. And yes, I do. Robert Lax is a good example, wonderful poet who was a friend of Robert Thomas Merton at Columbia. Rob Lax wrote these concrete poems, one stone, one stone, one stone, one stone falling, or something like that. Or he wrote a poem called 108 years old today, and not one perfect poem written. Vertical, down. Wonderful. And that's playful, it's charming, and it's concrete, and and that I would love that. If, when Williams uh, wrote his poems, he sometimes experimented like that, and I think that's great. So I look for a union between the simple declarative lyrical sentence, verse, and the experiment. But I don't want to write something that offends the reader, in a sense, to the point where it turns off the reader. I mean, I think you engage in this complicitous relationship with the reader, and you must give enough clues and enough for the reader to get hooked and to go along. I mean, if you just throw a bunch of words on a page and let the reader figure it out, maybe the reader might just close the book and never talk to you again, you know? So
Well,
just think,
how about if we can hear two last poems
okay,
for the listener and the reader to enjoy, and you pick from whatever collection you want.
all right. I know that you mentioned you had read The Splintered Face, so I'll read one poem from there. And then I'll read one other. This book, The Splintered Face, Tsunami Poems, was published by Hanging Loose Press, and it's available, I think, and it was written after the tsunami of Boxing Day, December 26th, 2004, what's known as the Asian tsunami that caused a huge devastation in about a dozen countries, and really was a wave that traveled the whole world. That and among the countries affected was Sri Lanka, my homeland, and I was that same year. My father had passed, and uh, so we were. Well, he died in May 17th, 2003. But we as a family were gathering together that holiday, that Christmas um, of December 2004. And I was thinking of my father. We were thinking about, and then the news comes through the radio of this disappearance of 20, 30,000 people just wiped away from the coast of Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka had gone through this brutal civil war and was still going through it at the time. And then I just couldn't understand how and why this island was being attacked, in a sense, by God in this way. You know, these explanations or lack of explanations. So I'll read you the title poem of that book. It's called Face. Imagine half your face rubbed out, yet you are suited up and walking to the office. How will your mates greet you? With heavy hearts, flowers, rosary beads? How shall we greet the orphan boy, the husband whose hand slipped, children and wife swept away? How to greet our New Years and our birthdays? Shall we always light a candle? Do we remember the time erases the shore? Grass grows, pains modified. At Hikkaduwa in 1980, I wrote a ditty, a sailor's song, about rain in sunny Ceylon. I don't know what calypsonians would compose about this monstrous wave, this blind hatchet man. Don't know, the Baila singers reply. We are a happy and go people, yet the fisherman's wife knows that her grandfather was eaten by the ocean. Fisher communities have suffered in time, and what's happened now is just another feast for that bloody, sleeping mother lapping at our island. But what if the ocean were innocent? The tectonic plates innocent? What if God were innocent? I do not know how to walk upon the beach, how to lift corpse after corpse until I am exhausted, how to stop the tears when half my face has been rubbed out beyond the railroad tracks, and this anesthetic, this calypso come to the last verse. What shall we write in the sand? Where are gravestones incinerated? Whose ashes are these, urned and floating through a house throttled by water? Shall we build a memorial some calculated distance from the sea, in a park, in the shape of a giant wave, where we can write the names of the dead? Has the wave lost its beauty, considered now obscene? Yet tomorrow, we must go to the ocean, and refresh ourselves in the sea breeze down in Hikkaduwa, where it is raining in sunny Ceylon. Tomorrow we must renew our vows at sunrise, at sunset. Let us say the next time the ocean recedes and parrots squawk and flee and restless dogs insist their humans wake up, we will not peer at the revelation of the ocean bed, nor seek photographs. We will run to higher ground, and gather there with our children, our cats, our dogs, our pigs, with what we've carried in our hands, albums, letters. We will make a circle, kneel, sit, stand in no particular direction, and pray, and be silent, and open our lungs, and shout thanks to our gods, thanks to our dogs. One thing if I may, poetry doesn't have to make you cry. Though making you cry is a good thing. It's a healing process for the soul and for the body. Poetry is not only good for the commemoration, for the mass, the memorial mass, but it is good for that too. What I'm trying to say is that poetry can be written for any occasion. Poetry can make you laugh. It can make you cry. It can make you upset. It can make you wise. It's the heart meeting the mind through words. And words are the way this meeting is expressed. And so I'm privileged and lucky, I feel, to have this blessing of this muse visit, regular conversation that I can translate into words. And I'm grateful that I can share this experience with both of you who are also practitioners of this holy and unholy art, at the same time. So it's a thrill to be able to chew the gristle with you, to discuss these matters, sacred and profane, because there is the sacred in poetry, I think, and I recognize that. I don't think it's but the sacred could be to a like God, but to some, I mean, the muse is a creature or a god or a goddess outside of us. This concept that we've invented, or that's invented for us, that there is this muse that speaks and inspires the poet. So it's hard to read to pick one last poem because but I will read maybe from my first book one poem, The Elephants of Reckoning, to finish the reading, and I'll read a poem called Kiss, and I wrote this in Hawaii, actually, another island, in Oahu, after a visit to the Big Island back in 1984. But it's a poem that goes back to the original island for me. Kissing your lips, kissing your lips, I try to forget roses or the fruit of palmyra trees, sweet and strong, tongue lolling upon tongue, heart beating against heart beating. These are my words signifying our human bodies, which poetry does not capture. The absolute desire I have to kiss your lips on this hot and sunny afternoon. I do not know how much longer I can walk about the garden kissing roses, or perambulate the toddy tavern of my dreams, where black faces and white toddy mix in black and white memories of Jaffna, Sri Lanka, my Tamil country, far away on an island across the sea, far away and far away, the palmyra fruit and your lips, to drink toddy now, to kiss your rosy lips now, to uproot the roses in my garden and offer them upon my tongue now, to fly to Sri Lanka and grab the last fruit on the tree before history throws the Tamils into the sea, as it said it will do, before all this and everything else, before the apocalypse. I do so sincerely wish, though my words may not fit, to rest my head in your hair and kiss your lips. Kiss. Thank you.